Good morning, welcome to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works. Today is Thursday, July 17th. Today, we are going to step away from news for the day for a little while and return to our book club reading. The book that we've been looking through is New World Order, The Ancient Plan of Secret Societies by William T. Still. The last time we did a little bit of a review of the first 4 chapters, and then we skimmed through chapters 5 and parts of 6, and so I just want to pick up a little bit more in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is on the French Revolution. On the first page of this chapter, near the bottom of the page, it says, "The French Revolution was the first example of what we would later come to know as Soviet-style revolutionary communism. As Russia's revolutionary leader, Prince Peter Kine, wrote in 1908, the Great Revolution, as he called it, was the source and origin of all the present communist, anarchist, and socialist conceptions." I think I probably read that last time when we were skimming through and doing a review, but I thought it worth repeating. Okay, so moving forward. So complete was the organization of the Jacobin clubs in France that between 1791 and 1792 all the Masonic lodges of France were closed down. The reason for this was that once the Jacobins felt that they were in control of the nation, they were fearful that Masonry might be used, as they had used it earlier, as a cover for a counter-revolutionary scheme. This aspect of history repeated itself in Nazi Germany 150 years later when Hitler suppressed the very Masonry that helped him rise to power. I thought this was a fabulous point and something that I mentioned in conversations before. Anybody who uses a mechanism to rise in power, in order to seal their power, they have to close the door on the very mechanism that they used. Even if you look through medieval times, Japan, I think, is a good example of this. They did not have the ingrained caste system that they have today, that we think of today with the Association of Japan, throughout all their history. There was a time that you could rise through the ranks of a farmer up through samurai and become a diplomat or a politician of one kind or another. And in fact, this was done. There was a farmer. He was on, the low end of the samurai, and he was a farmer, and he worked his way up through the ranks as a samurai and became a great military leader. And at this point, the military really rivaled the king, or the emperor rather, for authority, and so he enforced a very strict caste system to ensure nobody else could do what he did. And I'm sorry I can't give you names and dates. I'm just repeating this off of the top of my head. And I just think if you look it up, it's a really good example. And this book, of course, points to Hitler and Nazi Germany. It's true that Hitler closed down all kinds of clubs unless they were strictly Nazi clubs that reinforced his ideologies. And then they were forbidden. And at this time in history, especially across Europe, there were all kinds of youth and adult organizations that were clubs. They might be like music clubs or athletic clubs or just all kinds of things, rather than, today we have after school activities at the schools. These clubs was what people did for their amusements in the 1920s and 30s. And so Hitler used these groups, the Hitler Youth and such, to reinforce his ideology, but he closed down any such clubs that, if they weren't Nazis, it wasn't allowed. Why? Because they needed to be used as mechanisms of brainwashing rather than organizations free to promote their own ideologies. Alright, so moving down to the next paragraph on this. In the spring and summer of 1789, an artificial shortage of grain created by Illuminist manipulations of the grain market. This produced a famine so intense that it brought the nation to the edge of revolt. One of the leading figures in this scheme was the Duc d'Orleans, the Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodges. The Illuminists claimed that their revolution would be for the benefit of the bourgeoisie, with the people as instruments, but in reality the conspirators held up the food supplies and blocked all reforms in the National Assembly to exacerbate the situation, and the populace starved. By July 14th, the Bastille was stormed, from which a grand total of only 7 prisoners were liberated. Even French historians now acknowledge that the purpose of the revolutionaries was not to destroy the Bastille or liberate the prisoners, but to steal arms and gunpowder. Thus armed, on July 22, 1789, the Jacobins set into motion one of the most elaborately timed revolutionary exercises ever attempted. It would later be known as the Great Fear. And they go on a little bit more about how stirred up fear and had people burn down their own villages. We're going to skip down just a little bit. The scene in Paris was even worse. The city was running riot with criminals. The American minister in Paris, Governor Morris, who had been one of the architects of the U.S. Constitution, wrote that Paris in July of 1789 was a country as near to anarchy as a society can approach without dissolution. The authority of the king and the nobility is completely subdued. I tremble for the Constitution. For the next 3 years, the chaos continued. Then on August 10th, 1792, a band of rioters broke into the royal palace and killed the king's famous Swiss guards, who had been ordered not to fire on the people. The king was imprisoned, and he and his family were eventually executed. I thought this was interesting. I mean, here he had a famous guards, and yet they were ordered not to fire on the king's people. Down a little further, from the 10th of August onwards, stated Webster, we find the French tricolor replaced by the red flag of the social revolution, whilst the cry of Vive notre roi d'Orleans, long live the King of Orleans, gives way to the Masonic watchwords, liberty, equality, fraternity. Remarkably, even today, liberty, equality, fraternity remains the French motto. During the massacres in the prisons that followed in September, the assassins were observed to make Masonic signs to the victims and to spare those who knew how to reply. That's kind of creepy. Well, of course, mass murder is always rather creepy. Well, revolting would be a better word, although I don't know if that's even strong enough. This was, of course, no revolution of liberation, but one of oppression, hiding behind a shallow, meaningless facade of democracy. A century and a half later, the Nazi ideologue Goebbels would pay homage to the French Revolution for all the possibilities of life and development which it had brought to the people. In this sense, if you like, I am a Democrat. In fact, Hitler called the Nazi revolt the exact counterpart of the French Revolution. And what did Americans' patron saint of democracy, Thomas Jefferson, have to say of the Revolution? In 1791, after returning to the United States from a 3-year stint as minister to France, he described the carnage as so beautiful a revolution, and stated that he hoped it would sweep the world. He claimed to believe that most Frenchmen were Jacobins. Their excess, if one called them such, reflected that national will. Now this book, and especially this chapter, really is harsh rebuking on Thomas Jefferson and how he supported the French Revolution and his ideology being steeped in the same kind of Masonic ideology that pushed the French Revolution. And I think the author's right in rebuking Jefferson. However, there's certain aspects that I think he's entangling some of the good things, the grains of truth that Jefferson spoke, and mixing them up with this revolutionary Masonic fervor. Also, the reflected that national will. This is something that I think we hear a lot today about national wills and the will of the people. This is a concept that hasn't faded away, and I just think, on large part, it's rubbish. People are individuals, and, how can you possibly have a collective will of millions of people? I mean, seriously, even families have a hard time having a collective will, much less a whole nation of people. And I think it's often used as an excuse to push forward these revolutions and these changes. National will. Do people have a right to self-determination? I think yes, in some ways. If what they're determining isn't inherently wicked, like mass murder. This revolution, of course, promoted mass murder. So even if it was a majority opinion or belief, it wouldn't make it right. Just because the mob's doing it, that doesn't make it accurate. Just because those in power are doing it doesn't make it any right or wrong. You have to take it, what does God's law say? Murder is murder. This mass murder and anarchy is just insane. It's completely against God's word. God says, as much as possible, live peaceably with man. I mean, I don't know what else to say on that. This was certainly news to the French revolutionaries of that era, that this was the national will. The revolution did not have popular support. The monarchy did. According to one revolutionary observer writing in 1792, the Republicans are an infinitesimal minority. The rest of France is attached to the monarchy. Actually, it was the liberality of King Louis and his regard for the French people that led to his downfall. Each reform to which he acceded, each change was followed by new demands, and when violence broke out, the king hesitated to send troops against his own people. So, caution. Something I find a little scary about this chapter is the author's tone. Suggests that more violence and cracking down hard and such. He has a very statist mentality. By that I mean a very forceful and overbearing government sort of approach to solving these problems. And that in of itself can be very, very dangerous. Yes, you need law and order, but even this author himself pointed out that revolutionaries used the call for law and order to justify their deeds. I don't know how benevolent a king Louis was. I understand that history has vilified his wife with the lie of let them eat cake. Okay, but it doesn't mean that every monarchy or government faced with revolutionaries should necessarily, resort to things such as Patriot Act, the NSA mass spying, violations of civil liberties and privileges and rights. You're treading very dangerous grounds here. I believe there is a right way to handle revolutionaries and these ideas, but one does have to be careful that you're not sweeping up just, your normal civilians just going through their lives in the process. And I feel that this author doesn't, he doesn't balance his words too well. He doesn't measure, and I don't know, perhaps it's just because he's so focused on the revolutionaries that he doesn't focus on the counter-revolutionaries, the extreme, okay, we go from this bloodshed to this next counter-movement to try to bring back order, and what do? They create even more chaos. So, yeah, it's something you need to be careful of. Alright, so we're going to move on and jump to page 89, depopulation. And again, I think this is very relevant to today. The French economy was in shambles. Unemployment was rampant. Toward the end of 1793, the new revolutionary republic found itself faced with hundreds of thousands of working men for whom it could not find employment. The revolutionary leaders embarked upon a fearful new project that was to be copied by tyrants ever after, called depopulation. The idea was to reduce France's population of 25 million down to either 8 to 16 million, depending on which source you believe. Maximilian Robespierre believed depopulation to be indispensable. Robespierre, excuse me. I knew I'd heard his name recently, so I should have been able to pronounce that. Maximilian Robespierre believed depopulation to be indispensable. The system of the terror was thus the answer to the problem of unemployment. Unemployment brought about on a vast scale by the destruction of the luxury trades. In France, members of the revolutionary committees in charge of the extermination toiled day and night over maps calculating just how many heads must be sacrificed in each town. Fearful revolutionary tribunals tried to determine who would be killed, and a never-ending stream of victims marched to a variety of deaths. In Nantes, 500 children were killed in one butchery, and 144 poor women who sewed shirts for the army were thrown into the river. Stone quarries were a favorite site for mass extermination because of their precipitous drops and rocky floors, and it was said that many quarry operators had to shut down due to the piles of bodies. And what did Thomas Jefferson have to say of this extermination policy? Nothing would please me more than to report that over the years Jefferson's enthusiasm for the bloody revolution mellowed. However, in 1793, Secretary of State Jefferson wrote that rather than see the French Revolution fail, I would have seen half the earth desolated. Were there but an Adam and Eve left in every country and left free, it would be better than it now is. The liberty of the whole earth was depending on the issue of the contest. If taken literally, the incredibility of this statement cannot be overemphasized. Was Jefferson merely exaggerating for effect, or is this what he really meant? Would he really rather have seen the entire population of not only France, but of every nation on earth reduced to but a single couple, rather than see the revolution fail? He certainly knew the results of the revolution on France. In 1789, while still in Paris, he wrote to John Jay, "The city Paris is yet not entirely quieted. Every now and then summary execution is done on individuals by individuals, and nobody is in condition to ask for what and by whom. The details from the country are as distressing as I had apprehended they would be. Abundance of chateaux are certainly burning, and not a few lives sacrificed." Depopulation. I don't think it really started with French, or perhaps as a formulated ideology. The mass murder certainly isn't new at this point in history. But this is, we see this, around the world, the depopulation, even in our own nation. There's what's been called the Georgia Guidestones. These are guidestones. These are stones set up in a little town in Georgia. I believe it's off of one of the interstates. And it's kind of set up like Stonehenge because it's these big rock tablets. And it's written, I think, in 10 languages, 5 or 10 languages. I don't remember the exact number. But it has, I guess it must be like 5 languages, and it gives 10 commandments of the New World Order. And one of the big ones is depopulating the earth. These stones were set up on private property. The identity of who paid for it and built it is a mystery because it was used under, it was done under a false name. And so they are there today, and they've been there for decades. And people, New World Order, you conspiracy, you're just crazy. But look online, look at the photos. This is real. Some people genuinely have this ideology of destroying the population of the earth and keeping it limited. And it's not a new ideology. This book, says, here it started in the French Revolution, so we can at least trace it back that far to the 1790s. I mean, wow. And we still see people today. I mean, what's with this green earth and everything movement is, well, we have to depopulate the earth. Humans are the bane of nature. It's the scourge of the creation or something. Yeah, of course a lot of people would think that humans are the scourge of creation. Why? Because we're the ones that bear God's image. And Satan and those who follow him, whether they're open Satanists or not, if they're following his ideologies, this is the natural conclusion, is to wipe out mankind. Why? Because that's just what Satan does. He seeks to devour whom he may. And he uses different ideologies and means to bring this about. Now, we know God's in control, but guess what? This earth, it is going to get plenty ugly before it gets better. And that's the way it is. But we can still trust, God is in control. It's no surprise to him. Now, Satan doesn't know the exact time and hour of the peak of his power. He doesn't know the exact time and hour of Christ's return, of when the church is going to leave this world for heaven. He doesn't know these parts, the exact times. I mean, Jesus says, only his Father knows. So that means Satan doesn't have an idea of when it's going to happen. He does know that eventually he's going to fail, but he's determined to drag down as much of humanity with him as possible in the short time he has. And his time is growing shorter. But we know, read the back of the book. Yeah, it gets plenty ugly, but in the end, God wins. It's not yin and yang, equal forces of good and evil. Not by a long shot. I mean, the little black spot is nothing compared to God's complete sovereignty and will over his creation. He's long suffering with us to the fruition of his plan. And as we dive into these dark matters and these dark sayings, we just have to constantly remind ourselves of that. Let's see, where was I? Although the revolution never fulfilled its hoped-for goal of killing off 8 million French citizens, estimates of the final death toll at the time ran around 300,000. The revolution finally burned itself out, not for lack of revolutionary zeal, but because it consumed or destroyed the resources needed to sustain it. Edmund Burke, the conservative British statesman who was one of the greatest supporters of the Americans during their revolution, abhorred the results of the French Revolution. In his 1790 book, Reflections on the Revolution of France, he said, "Oh, what a revolution! Little did I dream that I should have lived to see disasters fallen upon the Queen of France, and a nation of gallant men, and a nation of men of honor. But the age of chivalry is gone. That of sophisters, economists, and calculators has succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever." As has been the case in every incident of social revolution since, the kings are dethroned as per the Masonic motto, but new aristocrats just take their place, less exposed and more hidden from public view. The conception of France rising like a phoenix from that great welter of blood and horror is as mythical as the allegory from which it is taken, and has existed only in the minds of posterity. Alois Hoffmann, the editor of the journal Die Vienna, wrote in 1793, "I shall never cease to repeat that the revolution has come from Masonry, and that it was made by writers and the Illuminati." Whose interests did the French Revolution serve? Certainly not those of the citizens in whose name it was waged. The idea for this revolution, remember, came from the German Illuminati, and although Illuminists' ultimate goals are international in scope, German nationalism could have played a role. After all, in a single decade, hundreds of years of French civilization was reduced to rubble and chaos, something German armies were never able to accomplish. This certainly did not serve the national interests of France, but it did serve the national interests of Germany. I think that's an interesting thought, but I do want to step back and say, even American founding fathers said that if America were to lose its liberty, it would be from within and not a foreign power. And I think this is true of a lot of nations. You know, if they're strong and have empires as such, it's going to fall inwards. And this was even true of the Roman Empire. Now, for sure, the French Revolution was motivated by a particular ideology. And as this book points out, though, these ideologies and Masonic lodges have been in existence probably since before the flood, and continued through Noah's son Ham and through Ham's descendants. And of course, the scripture says there's nothing new under the sun. Okay, well, with that ends what we're going to read today. And this was just a few highlights from this chapter. It was a lot more. It mentions Jefferson's and other Americans and their responses to the French Revolution. And the next chapter is about American Jacobins, and so how Freemasonry moved through the United States. And it deals a little bit with the Whiskey Rebellion and other such things in American history. Okay, so with that, we are going to move on to more pleasant things. We're going to move on to words of wisdom from the book of Proverbs. And of course, today we're on Proverbs chapter 17. Through desire a man, having separated himself, seeketh and intermeddleth with all wisdom. A fool hath no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. When the wicked cometh, then cometh also contempt, and with ignominy reproach. The words of a man's mouth are as deep waters, and the wellspring of wisdom as a flowing brook. It is not good to accept the person of the wicked, to overthrow the righteous in judgment. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calleth for strokes. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into innermost parts of the belly. He also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and is safe. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and as an high wall in his own conceit. Before destruction the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear? The heart of the prudent getteth knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeketh knowledge. A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men. He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. A lot causeth contentions to cease, and parteth between the mighty. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. A man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, and with the increase of his lips shall he be filled. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favour of the Lord. The poor useth entreaties, but the rich answereth roughly. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother.